My grandfather built that beach house with his own hands the summer before my father was born. It wasn't grand. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch that creaked in the wind, and a view of the Atlantic that could make you forget every bad thing that had ever happened to you. When he passed, he left it to me. My aunt had other plans, and because she forgot what I do for a living, she made the biggest mistake of her life. My name is Maya. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a forensic accountant. I follow money for a living. I find the money people try to hide, the money that disappears into accounts and shell corporations and charitable donations that are neither charitable nor donations. I rebuild financial timelines the way archaeologists rebuild pottery, shard by shard, until the whole picture is undeniable. My aunt knew what I did. She just never believed I would do it to her. That was her first mistake. My grandfather, Raymond, was the kind of man who measured his worth in the things he made rather than the things he bought. The beach house on Pelican Cove Road was his masterpiece. He'd poured 30 years of summers into it, adding the porch one year, the stone fireplace the next, the garden of seagrass, and wild roses the year after that. He also had a collection: antique navigational instruments, brass sextants, tide charts in hand-painted wooden frames, a ship's compass that had allegedly sailed the Pacific in 1887. To anyone else, they were old curiosities. To my grandfather and to me, they were stories made tangible. We'd spend rainy afternoons at the kitchen table with a loupe and a reference book, cataloging each piece, dating it, tracing its provenance. He called me his little detective. My aunt, my father's older sister, had always been a presence rather than a person in my life. She was loud in the way expensive things are loud, always announcing herself. She had built a successful career as a real estate broker in the same coastal county where the beach house sat, which meant she was very aware of what the property was worth on the open market. She smiled at family dinners and kissed cheeks and said things like we should do this more often, and then disappeared for months at a time. My grandfather tolerated her with the quiet patience of a man who understood that some people are simply hungry in a way that cannot be fed. 3 years before he died, my grandfather had a minor stroke. He recovered almost entirely, but his hands shook slightly after that, and he occasionally lost words mid-sentence, reaching for them in the air like he was trying to catch something. My aunt materialized at his side within a week. She brought casseroles and concerned looks and a folder of paperwork. She explained to him, gently and repeatedly, that he needed someone to help manage his affairs, someone local, someone who understood property and finances. She had him sign a power of attorney before the month was out. I was in Chicago at the time, working a contract audit for a healthcare company. I called my grandfather every Sunday, and he seemed fine, happy even, grateful to have my aunt nearby. I trusted that. I should not have. He passed in March, peacefully, in his own bed in the beach house, which was the only thing he'd ever asked for. I flew home immediately. At the reading of his will, I learned he had left the beach house and the entire collection to me, his little detective, as he'd written in his own words. He had left my aunt a modest sum of cash, $15,000, and a framed photograph of the two of them at his 50th birthday party. I remember watching her face when the attorney read that. She smiled, but her eyes went somewhere cold and flat and still. I flew back to Chicago to settle things, and planned to return the following month to begin the process of transferring the deed. 6 weeks after the funeral, I received a phone call from my aunt. Her voice was warm and brisk at the same time, the voice she used with clients. "I wanted to reach out before you got too deep into the estate paperwork," she said. "There are a few things we should talk about." "What kind of things?" I asked. "Well, the house needs significant work before it's in any condition to transfer. The roof has issues, the HVAC is original, the plumbing needs to be brought up to code. I've had a contractor come through. We're talking close to $90,000 in repairs." I set down my coffee. I wasn't aware of any of this. "Of course not. You've been in Chicago. I've been the one managing things. I'm just saying that as a practical matter, it might make more sense to consider a sale. The market is extraordinary right now. I could list it this summer and get you well above asking. You could take that money, buy something in the city, and honestly, Maya, it would be so much simpler. I don't want to sell it. I said. I know it's sentimental. I'm not being sentimental. I'm telling you what I want, which is the house my grandfather left me. There was a pause, the kind that is too precisely timed to be accidental. Of course, she said, her voice not changing at all. I just want what's best for you. I'll send over the contractor reports. She never sent them. 3 weeks later, I drove down to Pelican Cove Road. I hadn't told my aunt I was coming. The beach house looked the same from the road, the same weathered shingles, the same overgrown sea roses, the same creaking porch. But when I parked and walked to the front door, something was wrong. There was a lockbox on the door handle, the kind real estate agents use. I stood there for a moment, the salt wind off the water moving through the wild grass, and I felt a very specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I called my aunt. "Oh, good, you're there," she said, as if I were arriving for a planned visit. "Did you find the lockbox? I have the code." "Why is there a lockbox on my grandfather's door?" "Well, technically until the estate is settled. The estate is settled. The will is clear. That house is mine." "Maya." Her voice shifted into something practiced and patient. "There are renters." I heard myself breathe. "Say that again." "I arranged a short-term rental. Just through the summer. It's excellent income. It's covering the carrying costs, and frankly, the renters are lovely. A young couple from Boston. They're very respectful of the property. You rented out my grandfather's house. Your grandfather's estate, which I have power of attorney over, and which has not yet formally transferred. I made a practical decision to protect the property value and generate income. This is what property managers do. The power of attorney was to manage his affairs while he was alive. He's dead. That document is void. A pause. That's a matter of legal interpretation. It's not a matter of interpretation at all. Send me the rental agreement. She never sent it. I drove back to Chicago in a state of focused, crystalline fury. I have spent my career in the specific architecture of financial wrongdoing. I know what fraud looks like in its infancy. I had just seen it up close on a porch I'd been sitting on since I was 7 years old. I spent that weekend going through every piece of paperwork I had. The will was ironclad, drawn up by a reputable estate attorney, and signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. My grandfather's signature was on it, clear and strong, from 18 months before his death. Long before any stroke, long before my aunt's casseroles and her folder of documents. I also started looking at the collection. I had a complete catalog of every piece. My grandfather and I had built it together over years. 47 items, each photographed, described, and cross-referenced against provenance documents he'd collected with the same care a librarian gives to rare editions. I knew that catalog the way I know my own handwriting. I requested an inventory from the estate attorney, who was cooperative and somewhat apologetic in a way that told me he already suspected something wasn't right. When the inventory came back, there were 31 items listed. 16 pieces were unaccounted for. I opened a spreadsheet. I hired a forensic appraiser friend from New York to quietly pull recent auction records. 3 of the missing pieces turned up within a week. A brass sextant from 1843 had sold at a regional auction house in Connecticut 4 months ago, 2 months before my grandfather died. A hand-painted tide chart had gone at the same auction. A navigation compass, the Pacific one, the 1887, one that my grandfather and I had spent an entire rainy Saturday tracing to a ship's manifest, had sold privately to a collector in Maine for $11,000. Those sales had happened before my grandfather passed, while he was alive, while my aunt had power of attorney. I sat in my apartment in Chicago at 2 a.m, with the auction records on one screen and my grandfather's catalog on the other, and I understood. She hadn't started this when he died. She'd started this when he had the stroke. She had spent the last 3 years of his life quietly liquidating the pieces of it she could reach, piece by piece, using his own power of attorney against him. The rental agreement, the contractor fiction, the casual suggestion that I sell, all of it was damage control. She had wanted me out of the way before I started looking. I didn't call her. I called an attorney. Her name was Diane, a woman I'd worked alongside on an insurance fraud case years earlier, and she had a way of reading a page of financial documents the way most people read a novel, with genuine pleasure. I sat across from her desk and laid out everything I had. She sold pieces from the collection before his death, using power of attorney, I said. I need to know if that's criminal. Power of attorney authorizes management of someone's affairs for their benefit, Diane said, already flipping through the auction records. Selling off his personal property without his knowledge or consent, and keeping the proceeds, is a breach of fiduciary duty, at minimum. Depending on what the money trail shows, it could be theft. It could be elder financial abuse. I felt the words land somewhere quiet and heavy in my chest. Elder financial abuse. My grandfather, who had taught me to read a compass, who had taught me that old things were worth keeping, who had looked at me across a kitchen table and called me his little detective. I want to know where the money went, I said. Then let's find it, Diane said. What came next was slow and grinding and deeply satisfying in the way that only pulling a thread through a tangle can be satisfying. Diane subpoenaed my aunt's financial records. My aunt's attorney, a slick man named Perry, who looked like he'd been assembled from a catalog of aggressive confidence, filed motions to block everything, calling our requests invasive and retaliatory, in an attempt to bully a grieving woman who had spent 3 years sacrificing her personal time to care for an elderly parent. The estate judge was not moved. She had also, in the chaos of the will dispute my aunt had filed, attempting to claim that my grandfather's mental capacity had been compromised and that I had pressured him into the bequest, handed me discovery rights I would not otherwise have had. My aunt had opened the door herself. She had walked us straight into her own finances. The records, when they came, were a map I knew how to read. The auction proceeds had gone into a business account. The business was called Coastal Heritage Properties LLC. It was registered in my aunt's name. The stated purpose was acquisition and resale of coastal real estate and related assets. The related assets, as it turned out, were my grandfather's antiques. The company had been formed 11 months after he signed the power of attorney. It had been operational for nearly 3 years before he died. But the antiques were only part of it. Diane called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could hear in her voice that she had found the thing we didn't know we were looking for. The rental income, she said. The renters ETMN. The beach house. The lease was signed 8 weeks before your grandfather passed. I closed my eyes. While he was still alive. While he was still alive. And the rental income, $4,000 a month, has been deposited every month since into Coastal Heritage Properties, not into the estate, not into his account, into hers. I ran the numbers in my head before she said them. 8 months of rental income, $32,000, added to the auction proceeds from the 16 missing antiques, which we had now traced to a combined sale value of approximately $68,000. Added to a series of cash withdrawals Diane had found in my grandfather's personal checking account, $4,000 to $6,000 at a time, spread over 2 years, withdrawn by my aunt using power of attorney for purposes listed vaguely as household maintenance and medical coordination. My grandfather had been in excellent health until his stroke. His actual medical costs, as I knew from managing his supplemental insurance after his death, had been minimal. The total we could document, conservatively, was just over $140,000. I had a cousin, my aunt's son, whose name was Tyler. He was 26, handsome in the way a carefully composed photograph is handsome, and he ran a lifestyle brand online with about 300,000 followers. He posted about coastal living and heritage cooking and slow mornings, all of it shot in what appeared to be a beautifully appointed beach house. I had watched his content in passing over the years with mild curiosity, the way you observe a stranger's vacation photos. I had never looked closely. I looked closely now. The fireplace in the background of a video he had posted 11 months ago was made of stacked river stone. My grandfather had built that fireplace. In the same video, on the kitchen windowsill, there was a small brass object that caught the light. I paused the video and zoomed in until my eyes ached. It was a pocket compass, brass, with a cracked crystal face. My grandfather had bought it at an estate sale in Vermont when I was 12. I remembered the crack in the crystal. I had a photograph of it in the catalog. I sent a screenshot to Diane without a message. She called me 30 seconds later. He's been shooting content in the house, she said. Since before my grandfather died, I said. That confirms prior access and prior use. This isn't just your aunt, Maya. Tyler was in that house. He was benefiting from it. My cousin, whose brand was built on the aesthetic of inherited grace and slow coastal life, had been building it in a house that didn't belong to his family. He had been using my grandfather's beach house, my grandfather's light, my grandfather's stone fireplace, as a backdrop for a life that was a performance. I thought about calling him. I decided against it. The time for calls had passed. The mediation was required before trial, and it was exactly as uncomfortable as I had expected. The conference room was in a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. I sat with Diane on one side of the table. My aunt sat across from me with Perry, and, to my mild surprise, my cousin Tyler, who could not quite decide where to look. My aunt was polished. She always was. Charcoal blazer, gold earrings, hair in a neat chignon. She looked like a woman who expected to win. "We've come to this mediation in good faith," Perry began, "to find a resolution that honors the family relationship and moves everyone forward. My client has invested considerable personal time and resources in managing this estate. She's prepared to discuss a settlement that compensates her fairly for those services while honoring the spirit of Mr. Raymond's wishes." "The spirit of his wishes is in writing," Diane said pleasantly. "His wishes were that Maya receive the beach house and the collection in their entirety. We're not here to negotiate the outcome. We're here because it's a required step before trial, which we are fully prepared for." Perry smiled the smile of a man who had not read our discovery documents carefully enough. "I understand the posturing, but surely we can find a number that—" "Before we discuss numbers," Diane said, setting a bound folder on the table and sliding it across, "I'd like your client to review this." My aunt reached for it. She opened the first page. I watched her eyes move across it. She turned to the second page. Her jaw tightened, barely perceptible, but I had been watching her face since I was a child and I saw it. "This is a summary of the financial records produced in discovery," Diane said. "Specifically, it documents the liquidation of 16 items from the estate collection, conducted through Coastal Heritage Properties, LLC, generating approximately $68,000 in proceeds. It also documents $32,000 in rental income from the beach house collected under a lease signed while Mr. Raymond was living, without his documented consent, deposited directly into the same LLC account, and it documents a series of cash withdrawals from Mr. Raymond's personal checking account totaling $44,000 over a 26-month period, attributed to household and medical expenses for a man whose actual out-of-pocket medical costs during that period were under $2,000. The room was very quiet. "The total we've been able to document," Diane continued, "is $144,000. We believe the actual figure is higher." "This is completely," Perry started. "We're not finished," Diane said, and her voice had the precise patience of a surgeon. She slid a second document across the table. This one was a series of screenshots, my cousin's videos, my grandfather's fireplace, my grandfather's compass, my grandfather's kitchen. We also have evidence that Tyler has been using the property for commercial content creation since at least 11 months before Mr. Raymond's death, generating advertising revenue through the use of the house and its contents, which were at no point authorized for commercial use. Tyler made a sound. It was small and involuntary, like air escaping something. "Mom," he said, "what is this?" "This is a negotiation tactic," Perry said quickly. "Tyler, don't say anything." "What is she talking about?" Tyler said, his voice rising slightly. $140,000? Where did that come from?" My aunt's voice, when she finally spoke, was very controlled. "This is a gross mischaracterization of financial management decisions made in good faith on behalf of an elderly man who needed his daughter to protect him," I said, and the words came out very quiet and very even. "Not to sell his things while he was still alive. Not to rent out the house he was living in. Not to drain his savings account $4,000 at a time and call it household expenses." Her eyes met mine for the first time since I'd walked into the room. There was no warmth in them. There had never really been warmth in them. There was only the flat, cold stillness I had seen at the will reading. "You have no idea what I sacrificed for that man," she said. "I know exactly what you took from him," I said. "I have the receipts." Tyler's hands were flat on the table in front of him. He was staring at the screenshots of his own content. I watched him look at the compass in the window frame, the compass he had used as a prop without ever asking what it was, or where it had come from, or why an old man had kept it on his windowsill for 30 years. The mediation ended without resolution. My aunt and Perry left quickly. Tyler stayed behind for 90 seconds after they walked out, which was long enough for him to look at me and say, in a voice that had lost all its performance quality, "I didn't know where the money came from. She told me. It was an investment. She said he would have wanted me to be successful." "Did you ask him?" I said. He didn't answer. He picked up his jacket and left. The trial was in a small, beige courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and central heating. I sat with Diane, our table stacked with neatly labeled folders. My aunt sat with a new attorney, a quieter and more serious man than Perry, who I later learned had immediately advised her to stop talking about the financial allegations entirely and focus solely on the will contest. Perry had withdrawn from the case 2 days after the mediation. Irreconcilable differences, the filing said. The will contest was dispatched efficiently. Diane put my grandfather's estate attorney on the stand, who confirmed the will had been drawn up a full 18 months before his stroke, when he was entirely lucid, and that he had been clear and specific about his intentions. She put his physician on the stand, who confirmed that while his physical health had declined, his cognitive function had remained intact and oriented until the final weeks of his life. She presented letters, emails, voice messages. My grandfather had a habit of leaving me voicemails just to share something he'd read or something he'd seen through the kitchen window. I had saved every one. His voice, dated and recorded, said things like, "I want you to have the compass collection, Maya, because you're the only one who actually sees what they mean, and I've made sure everything is in order, so you won't have to fight for any of it." He had known. Somewhere in the long years of watching his daughter manage his affairs with a little too much efficiency, he had known. And he had done what he could to protect me. Diane then moved to the counterclaim. She laid it out with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything. Exhibit after exhibit, the Coastal Heritage LLC records, the auction house invoices, the rental agreement signed 2 months before my grandfather's death, the cash withdrawal ledger. She walked through the numbers clearly enough that even someone with no financial background could follow the architecture of what had been done. My aunt's new attorney objected repeatedly. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead until she needed them, overruled him each time with the brief efficiency of someone who has heard every version of a particular argument and found none of them persuasive. Then Diane called my cousin to the stand. He had come. I had not been certain he would. He walked in alone, without my aunt, and he sat in the witness chair like someone who had not slept in several days, which I suspected was true. He was still recognizable as the person in those videos, the clean lines and the confident posture, but something in him had gone quiet. He looked young. He looked his age. Diane was gentle with him in a way that was also, I recognized, strategically sound. You do not destroy a sympathetic witness. You simply let them tell the truth. "Can you describe your living situation for the past year?" she asked. He had been staying at the beach house on and off, he said, using it as a location for his content. His mother had told him it was fine, that she was managing the estate, and the property was available for family use. "Did you understand the house had been rented to another family during that period?" He had not. "Did your mother explain to you how she was funding the Coastal Heritage LLC business account, which she described to you as an investment in your brand?" She had told him it was from personal savings and some property management income. He had believed her. He had not asked further questions. He acknowledged now that he should have. "Did you know that items from the collection, including a brass sextant and a hand-painted tide chart that appear in your content, had been sold without the knowledge or consent of the owner?" He looked at his hands. "No," he said. "I didn't know." "One more question," Diane said. The pocket compass that appears in the background of a video you posted last November. Do you know where it is now? He was quiet for a moment. It's at my apartment, he said. I took it when I was packing up. I liked the way it looked. That compass, Diane said, is listed in the estate inventory and has a verified provenance to a Pacific voyage in 1887. It belongs to my client. He nodded once, slowly, like a man confirming something he had already decided to accept. I'll return it, he said, not to Diane, but to me. My aunt had not looked at me once during the proceedings. She sat with the controlled rigidity of someone holding themselves together through will alone, her new attorney's hand occasionally moving toward her arm in a gesture of restraint that told me she had already required restraining at least once. When Diane rested our case, my aunt's attorney stood and said his client would be invoking her Fifth Amendment protections with respect to all questions relating to the financial transactions at issue. He said it in the even tone of a man reading a prepared statement, which is exactly what it was. The judge looked at my aunt over her reading glasses for a long moment. Then she began to speak. She had heard the will contest, she said, and found it entirely without merit. The evidence of my grandfather's capacity and his intentions was unambiguous, consistent, and extensively documented. The petition was denied. The beach house and all contents of the estate were confirmed as the sole property of the rightful heir, meaning me. She paused. Furthermore, she said, the financial evidence presented in the counterclaim described a pattern of conduct that could not be addressed by the civil court alone. She was referring the complete discovery record, including all bank records, LLC filings, auction receipts, and testimony, to the state attorney's office for investigation into potential charges of financial elder abuse, breach of fiduciary duty, and theft by deception. She was also noting for the record that the rental income and collection proceeds at issue had been generated through the unauthorized use of estate property and were to be returned in full pending the criminal investigation. She awarded me all legal fees. She looked at my aunt one more time before she adjourned, and she said, with a quietness that filled the room completely, "You were trusted with the care of a vulnerable man. What you did with that trust is the reason these laws exist." The gavel came down. My aunt was arrested 4 months later, at her own office, in the middle of a client meeting. The real estate board suspended her license within the week, pending investigation. The criminal charges included elder financial abuse, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. The DA's office found, in the course of their investigation, that Coastal Heritage Properties LLC had been used for additional transactions beyond my grandfather's estate, a pattern that widened the case considerably. My cousin cooperated with the investigation. In exchange for his full testimony, the DA declined to charge him as a co-conspirator, accepting instead his position as an unknowing beneficiary. He returned the compass, handed it to me in a parking lot outside a coffee shop where we had met because there was nowhere else to meet. He held it out in both hands, which I thought was accidental, but which felt like something else. He would have shown me what it was if I'd asked, Tyler said. Yes, I said. He would have. We didn't have anything else to say. Our relationship wasn't repaired. It wasn't a story with a clean ending. It was two people standing in a parking lot acknowledging the distance between them, and that was honest, and honesty is more than we'd had before. I went back to the beach house in October, when the summer renters were long gone and the season had turned the light gold and low. I had hired a preservation specialist to catalog what remained of the collection and to help me source, through the auction house's own records, the pieces that had been sold. I was able to recover 11 of the 16. Some had moved on to further buyers and were gone for now, maybe forever. I was making peace with that. The kitchen wall needed repainting. I painted it the same color it had been, a deep sea green my grandfather had chosen in 1994 and never second-guessed. I repaired the porch railing where a board had gone soft. I found, in the back of the closet in the room that had always been mine, a shoebox with my name written on the lid in my grandfather's handwriting. Inside were birthday cards I had sent him going back 20 years, every one, in order, the earliest ones with crayon drawings on the inside covers. He had kept all of them. He had organized them with the same careful attention he brought to his navigation charts. I sat down on the kitchen floor and read every single one. Outside, the seagrass moved in the October wind, and the light came through the windows the way it always had, long and slanted and honest. The house was quiet in the way that places are quiet when they are exactly what they are supposed to be. My grandfather had built this place to last. He had built it knowing his daughter's sharp edges. He had built it knowing I was the one who would see it for what it really was. And in the end, in the only way available to him, he had handed me every tool I needed to defend it. I am a forensic accountant. I follow the money, and the money, as it always does when you follow it far enough, led me back to the truth. The case is closed, the file is sealed, the house is mine. I made sure you're subscribed to see stories like this through to the end, and if this one hit close to home, let me know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from today?